As your senator, building a modern transportation system will be one of my priorities because investing in transportation is investing in our people. For many working families, transportation isn't just about getting from one place to another. It's about opportunity. It's about keeping a job, getting an education, and building a better future. A strong economy depends on a strong middle class, and a strong middle class depends on having the tools people need to succeed. That's why transportation matters. When workers can get to work reliably, business can grow. When businesses grow, jobs are created. And when jobs are created, families thrive. Imagine a Guam where opportunity is within reach for everyone. I'm Donna Munikanata, and I approve this message.
Let's start with the bottom line, because I think this has been such a convoluted issue that it's easy to lose track of what is objectively important here amid the perceived scandal of it all. And what is important to remember at the outset, the bottom line here in this entire Simon Sanchez High School procurement development, where Cortec, if not for 3 protests that have been lodged by GPS in the procurement of Simon Sanchez High School development, if not for their protest, Cortec would be awarded a contract to develop Simon Sanchez High School. And the key takeaway here, the bottom line of it all, is that the parties involved in this with the ability to make this happen, as in the Guam legislature, which has authorized it, and the administration, which is in charge of the negotiations and the contracting, are authorized and ready to take more than $500 million of your money and my money over a 32-year period to pay Cortec for this one public facility. It would be the most expensive single public infrastructure project that the government, that the executive branch would have ever undertaken. And there is quite a bit of political wrangling that is happening on multiple fronts of this issue, with several senators saying that what the administration has done since they authorized this Simon Sanchez High School procurement is nothing like what they were told was happening or would happen with Simon Sanchez High School procurement. But based on everything that has come to the public surface in the letting out of documents and negotiation meeting minutes that have been recorded and for which either audio or video footage is available, and we have gone through extensively, the Leandro Tenorio administration is prepared to interpret the law and to use that interpretation of the law to pay Cortec $16.377 million every year for 32 years in a leaseback contract, which amounts to more than $500 million. And not everybody is okay with that. I have to imagine not every taxpayer would be okay with that. And I do know that not every senator is okay with that. We have gone through this. We have reported on this significantly. Today, as the Legislative Finance Committee was in the Committee of the Whole to discuss the budget, the issue of a $16.3 million appropriation in the fiscal year 2027 budget came up, because the administration is trying to pressure the legislature into making this appropriation. And it is like clockwork. It is as we expected in our discussion of Behind the Bid in our investigative series, that this is exactly what the negotiators and Cortec wanted the legislature to do. There was even what is being said was a joke attached to this prophesied appropriation, and it was during meeting 6 of the negotiations, Ho Yun saying that he probably should make bigger donations to campaigns in order to get this fiscal year 2027 appropriation. In an exchange that happened today between Senator Chris Duenas, who is the head of the Budget Committee, and Lester Carlson, who is the governor's budget director and who was part of that negotiating team, and to be fair, was the only member of the negotiating team to raise serious objections to Ho Yun's attempts to get $16.3 million every year for 32 years. Lester Carlson, he didn't say anything about the 30 years, which is already like an issue, right? Like why, how is it that we're at the max here? That's the max that the legislature authorized in the Makahat Act in 2023. $16.3 million for a 30-year period, right? No questions were asked, at least none that you could hear in the negotiating meeting tapes, to bring down that 16.3 million to 16.1 or 15.5 or 10.6. It was always going to be 16.3 according to those negotiations between Cortec and the administration. Where Lester Carlson put the brakes on was in Ho Yun, the chairman of Cortec, his continuous attempts throughout the negotiating meetings to get $16.3 million for each of 2 additional years, called year 31 and year 32. But essentially, they're the first 2 years of the entire arrangement, because how a leaseback works is you lease the property, the government property under which the school is built, right? So the government of Guam, for a 2-year period and no more, would lease the property to the developer. In this case, Cortec, or if Cortec loses, then GPS or whoever, right? To the developer, 2 years, you get to lease it. During that lease period, you get to have full access to it so you can build the facility. After the lease period, the lessee leases back the property to the government of Guam at a cost, at a fee. The legislature tied this to what essentially would be the maximum amount of debt service to be paid, $16.3 million over a 30-year leaseback period. Instead of just 30 years, the administration was willing to give 2 more, subject to legislative appropriation. The legislature in fiscal year 26, they authorized a $16.3 million appropriation. And now, as they're discussing fiscal year 27, they are doing, as was prophesied during the negotiations, another $16.377 million. And to the benefit, it would be to the benefit of the developer. In this case, it has not been awarded yet, but if the procurement goes through, it would be Cortec. So that the fiscal year 26 plus the fiscal year 27 plus the contractual agreement for fiscal years for the end of the lease period, after the 2 years it takes to construct it, all the way to the end of the 30 years later, another $16.377 million for each of those 30 years. It comes out to more than $500 million. We have asked senators, did you guys know that when you made the appropriation in fiscal year 2026, that this was an additional payment on top of the 30 years? And what did you know about this? Did you know that this was for Cortec? And the thing here is for those of you who want to be partisan about it, there's not going to be much wiggle room. So I'll tell you this. This is a company that has funded the campaigns, not just of the lieutenant governor. Yes, big contributor to the lieutenant governor's campaign. That's true. Also a big contributor to Republican campaigns. That's just as true. And the fact that nobody in this on the negotiating table was negotiating the price down. That was their entire role. You negotiate the price down so us taxpayers don't have to pay so much. It's part of the negotiation, right? Or otherwise, are we going to get more out of this? But in those negotiating meetings, all that occurred was the $16.3 million staying for the entirety of the 30 years, adding 2 more years of the $16.3 million, while at the same time negotiating down the school, as in the infrastructure, trying to shave off square footage from classrooms, from the height from floor to ceiling, the sizes of hallways, entire wings being gotten rid of. That was how the negotiating with the government of Guam went. And so there's been a whole lot of media exposure about this and a lot of questions that have come about since the playing of those negotiation meetings. And the administration has never really been able to say anything because, of course, this whole thing's under procurement. Lester Carlson, he starts answering questions today. And Lester Carlson brings up a point that and let me see. Lester Carlson says that Senator Chris Duenas asks, is this what this was all along, Lester? That instead of a 30-year payment, you guys meant for this to be a 32-year payment. And Lester comes back and says, Senator, that's what you guys authorized. That's what the legislature authorized. The legislature allowed 32 years. And Chris Duenas, and remember, Chris Duenas was not in the majority at the time that the legislature authorized this. The Makahat Act was sponsored in 2023 and I believe passed in 2024. It might have been passed in 2023. But the Makahat Act was by then Senator Roy Kinatsa, who was the head of the Simon Sanchez Rebuild Legislative Oversight Committee. And he was the one, it was his law that authorized this. And Chris Duenas comes back and he says, I was a part of that legislature, and Lester, I don't remember you guys ever saying this. And in off-the-record conversations that I'm having with other senators, their recollection is the same, that they believe that the administration is not being truthful about these things. But on the other side of the commercial break, what I want to bring to you is that snippet of, it's not a snippet, it's about 20 minutes worth of this back and forth between Lester Carlson and Chris Duenas. And it includes Steve Guerrero, who's the executive director of the Office of Finance and Budget over at the legislature. And even he chimes in and he says, this is not what the administration is saying today, is not what was represented to the legislature when these appropriations were made. But I have to tell you, it's highly disconcerting that there is a disagreement on the magnitude of $16.3 million in fiscal year 2026, and now another attempt at another $16.3 million for fiscal year 27. A disagreement about $10,000 is one thing. A disagreement about $32 million is quite another. And we're going to talk about these things when we come back from the other side of the commercial break. Stick with us.
He has that innate talent of even the most difficult times, giving comfort, giving solace, bringing stability. In my 64 years, there are people I've known that have passed away, and there's been Tony that has been there to comfort the family and the loved ones, sometimes the most difficult times of their lives. He could better this community as a public servant, but bring people together, even people with divergent thoughts and philosophies, but in the end, bringing enough comfort, enough stability to a situation that there's a consensus and then resolution and progress that is made. So, I'm so excited. I've seen what a great job Tony's done now back in the legislature. But I do believe that with him as governor, that ability to bring people together, to bring folks even with different perspectives together, it's what this island needs. God bless Atacaubo 2026. God bless Guam.
I'm Tony Atta, and I approve this message.
Transportation, tourism, customs, utilities, and federal and foreign affairs touch every family, every business, every day. Jesse Michael Anderson Lujan believes Guam can be greater together by fighting for cabotage exemption, expanding the Philippine visa waiver program, and opening new doors for tourism investment and opportunity. Vote Jesse Lujan. Leadership you can see. Accountability you can trust.
I'm Jesse Michael Anderson Lujan, and I approve this message.
So what exactly did senators know at different stages of this thing, right? What did senators think that they were passing when they passed the McCahat Act? And they made an authorization there where they had, and it was a little odd, right? First, the type of people who they placed on the negotiating panel, the negotiating team panel, and mostly political appointees by the governor. That was the first thing that was a little bit off. The second thing that was a little bit off is that the legislature did not mandate that the government of Guam use a multi-bid step process, very much like how NAVFAC does things. It's just a pretty fair, straight up type of process, right? Okay, that was the other thing that was a little bit odd. But then when it came to the numbers section of the McCahat Act, there were 3 ceilings that the legislature instituted. One was that the principal amount of financing, or the cost or whatever, for Simon Sanchez High School was 166 point something million dollars, right? And the reason that's confusing is that the legislature also instituted an annual leaseback payment cap of $16.377 million over a 30-year period. And then in order to ensure that the government of Guam wasn't going to get screwed over, the legislature instituted an 8.5% interest rate cap on any financing. But to have the interest rate financing plus the $16.3 million annual debt service or lease payment cap on top of the $167 million thing was a little bit confusing, right? But it was the legislature that instituted this. And when you look at the law that was passed by Senator Roy Kinata, Lester Carlson might have a point, and I don't know how the lawyers interpret this, but the legislature did, through the McCahat Act in 2023, authorized $16.3 million annual payments to include the pre-development, lease, and leaseback period. That is all 32 years. That is the 30 years of the leaseback period, and that is the 2 years in the front, known as the pre-development and the lease period. So Lester Carlson is saying something about that. I mean, there does seem to be something being said about that, or to be said about that, right? So that's the McCahat Act. And then you fast forward, and in the middle of the procurement, in the middle of negotiations in the summer of 2025, Cortec had already been selected as the most qualified. Cortec was in negotiations with the administration's negotiating team. And in July of 2025, someone contacts the legislature, because Senator Joseph Augustine, he makes a floor amendment to the budget. And that floor amendment is to appropriate $16.3 million for Simon Sanchez for a leaseback payment, which you have to ask the senators who were voting, why did you think that you had to make a leaseback payment in a fiscal year that is 2 years prior to Simon Sanchez High School? The ground had not even been broken. Like, there was no need to make a leaseback payment for at least 2 more years. Why would you appropriate the first year of the leaseback payment 2 years ahead of schedule? Nobody asked that. Not in my review of the legislative session, but okay, odd, $16.3 million. It passes. This was before the news of the procurement protest. This was before anybody knew that the administration was ready to give away the farm, because all of those discussions were closed up until just this year when we broke the news about all this stuff, right? And then the legislature amends that portion of the law that they had passed in the Budget Act for fiscal year 26. And in December, a bill is introduced, and in January, it is discussed and it's voted on, that discusses that $16.3 million appropriation, and then makes a change to how the developer is able to go and secure financing. And it's been explained to me as something that did not violate the procurement, but that strengthens the ability for whatever. It's just all such technical stuff that I don't understand, right? And I don't know how to ask the right questions in order to get to the truth of the matter. It's just such a complicated finance thing, right? But that $16.3 million remained, and then the news comes. Then the negotiating tapes are leaked, and we all find out what was being said in these negotiating meetings. And one of the first things that said, because in the very first meeting, it was obvious from minute one that what was discussed in minute one was that Cortex price was above the $167 million. But that's not what should alarm us the most. And that's for the GPS has protested on that point and whatever, right? Leave that to the GPS protests for them to argue that stuff. What should alarm us as taxpayers is throughout the entirety of this thing, what's discussed is the taxpayers paying for 30 years, 16.377, the maximum. The administration never negotiates that price or attempts to negotiate that price down. All they do is acquiesce or sometimes oppose efforts by the developer, by the selected developer, Cortex, to take things away from the Simon Sanchez High School design. No discussion whatsoever on that $16.3 million coming down. It's like an automatic. That's what should concern us the most. But it doesn't stop there. The Cortex decides they're going to dig in, and they want year 31 and 32, as in the first 2 years of payments. They want it before they hand over any school that is there under their contractual obligation to build under this arrangement. They want a $16.3 million payment on the first year and another $16.3 million payment on the second year during the 2 years that it's not our responsibility to pay anything. Our responsibility to pay comes during the leaseback period. And the administration essentially gives it away. So we kind of get a little bit of what happened next, because the negotiation meetings ended. The publicly available negotiating meetings go up to meeting 6. There's definitely stuff that happened after that, because at the end of meeting 6, there was no finality to things. They were still on the issue of, can we legally do this with the 16.3 for fiscal year 26, which had already passed the legislature by that time. And that at the time of the meeting, it was just awaiting the governor's signature. It ends up becoming law, but that appropriation did pass. But what they weren't sure of was the fiscal year 27, $16.377 million, and whether they could legally go forward with a contract with that one thing that's missing. Now we know from today's exchange between Senator Chris Duenas and Lester Carlson that at some point the administration got some type of legal guidance that said, yeah, matter of fact, the legislature did authorize that. And as you listen to this, I mean, I don't know that anyone who has been following this stuff and, it's been being reasonable about this and objective is going to be surprised at the level of opacity, if you will, in how the administration deals with, a lot of money, right? But the other thing is, well, what did the senators know? And what was it that they were thinking when at first they were approached about the fiscal year 26, 16.3 million? Now that they're being politically ransomed into another $16.377 million. And what was their understanding of what they passed in the McCaw-Hart Act? And all of these things need to be considered in this entire discussion. So let's go over now to that one portion. And this is, by the way, the context of this is within their discussion about whether to reduce the BPT from the present 4.5% to 4%. The legislature is battling on the revenue side of things. And this is why the Simon Sanchez High School thing comes up, because the administration is saying, look, if you want to fund the $16.3 million for fiscal year 27 in order for us to get Sanchez going, then you're going to have to keep the BPT at 4.5 and not reduce it to 4%. And what I'm saying, and I don't want to comment on whether the BPT should be lowered to 4%. That's, for me, that's beside the point. That's a whole other discussion. However, I don't, as a taxpayer, and I have to imagine many other taxpayers feel the same way, I don't think we're getting a great deal with this whole give one developer that has such strong political influence and connections over both parties that govern this government more than $500 million for one public facility. After hearing in those negotiating tapes how no one was doing any negotiating for value for the people of Guam, because the administration had been hell-bent in all of those negotiation tapes to just give away the farm. Yeah, I don't think that we should be making a $16.3 million appropriation to the benefit of Cortec in this new budget, especially considering that the chairman of Cortec talked about having to donate more money into the campaigns of senators in order to get this appropriation. What sort of message is that supposed to send us as taxpayers and as citizens and as voters? Senators, are you saying that your vote is for sale? That you are going to give away $500 million of our money so that you can get an additional $1,000 for your campaign commercials? Because a vote that way is what it tells me. Anyway, here is that portion of the session so you can hear this entire exchange.
Chairman Dueñas, you're recognized.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Just want to follow up, Steve, on the questioning from the speaker. So you say we have costs appropriated against it, but those are one-time costs, correct? We'll have a new fiscal year in 2027, right?
You can say that, Senator, yes.
So if we were tracking the same way, that would be new money that would be available for appropriation on top of what if we adopted this level.
Conceivably, yes.
Lester, 16 million for Simon Sanchez. In the much reported known negotiations that you're currently involved in, you stated in those negotiations that the 16.3 has been appropriated in fiscal year 2026, correct?
No, sir. What I said was the legislature gave the governor transfer authority to pay the 16 million.
But you had a funding source.
No, I don't. So I have a fundamental disagreement with the premise from OFB that there are lapses, because what I said was there are three things that the legislature appropriated, authorized with the governor's transfer authority. One was Simon Sanchez. The other one was the fuel tax arrears. If we could have done the governor's transfer authority from the supposed lapses, which, again, I think we just need to tighten up our ship here, then we would have done it. We would not have come down here.
Then how are you in negotiations if you don't have an appropriation that you said you needed?
Well, you know, there was an appropriation, there was an authorization. However, there are means to be able to take with this body, as the speaker noted. There's the $88 million, and Mr. Guerrero is correct. You should probably net out the $25 million for the hospital and for DOC, just to safeguard it. But you could appropriate that from the excess. So we weren't ready to come, as Mr. Guerrero said, with a contract But the idea that we're a lot closer to getting something done than we are not getting something done, and then to not fund it is again, it's disingenuous at the least.
Is the 16.3 currently that you say that is available or could be available, is that in addition to the 166 authorized by the McGrath Act, or is it part of it?
This is the thing that's a little bit funny about the authorizing legislation. It says that the financing cannot go more than 30 years, but it authorizes 2 years of pre-construction and design work. So in essence, it's 32 years. So we do need to fund the 32 years, because that's what the most qualified bidder's proposal is. It's not 30 years, it's 32 years.
That was never represented to us, even when you asked for the initial appropriation.
Well, you know, this procurement stuff is supposed to be held closer to the vest than not, but there's been so much media on it. There's been so many stories about, you know, taking into account the procurement record and records that were released and stuff that was posted, you know, in an attempt to be transparent. So, you know, if you were to speak to the most qualified bidder, he will verify what I'm saying. So we have time and time again tried to maintain the you know, procurement, but I don't have any problem saying what I'm saying now because it's all over the news.
Thought I heard you say during the negotiations that 146 or 144 was going to be what he had to live with in order to build the school, and that's what you were negotiating because you didn't have the 2 extra years.
He was at, we shouldn't be talking numbers, sir, but you know, trust me.
We have to, because I'm going to tell you right now on this body, if they're going to appropriate 16.3 on top of the 16.3 appropriated this year, they are going to be now, many on this floor who said they didn't believe that there was 2 additional years in this financing, they will be appropriating for 2 additional years.
Go look at the legislation, sir. It's very clear that the 2 years are authorized. So you really need to take the finance portion and the cash funded portion, put them together, it's 32 years.
I hope that those are listening on the floor that want to raise the BPT again back to 4.5 because they need to fund this. They're now going to be funding 2 additional years to the McGrath Act.
It's what's authorized, sir. I'm not, you know, look, that's beyond me. It's
Okay.
like black and white.
Be cautious, buddy.
Me?
To the body.
Oh, okay.
Talking to my colleagues.
I thought you said buddy.
Talking to my colleagues.
All right. And just so I may, look, Mr. Guerrero and I, we go way back, right? We have a good relationship. You know, while he was saying that he talked to public health and that they'll live, I just got a text from the director. And I believe several senators here also got a text from the director saying that they do not agree. So I'm not really, he would not say anything that wasn't true or that he didn't believe to be true. But he said he spoke to the chief financial officer. Now I got the director texting me basically saying, no, that's not true. So things that were done and things that were said, you know, things change. I agree with Steve, things change. But when you have the director listening into the budget discussions and refuting what is being said by her staff member, you know, the body needs to be aware of that. We're talking about public health, talking about Medicaid. And I would also like to point out to the body that the behavioral health, DSID, and, you know, I don't disagree with what Mr. Guerrero said about the contractual cost rising, but we don't control that. These are contracts for providers. And the cost to the providers is going up just like everything else is going up. So, you know, there are things that they do in-house, there are things that they have control over, but when you're bidding out the services that they have, you know, and the responses come in at a higher rate, I mean, what are we going to do? Not provide these very critical services to people that are vulnerable? I mean, We could probably draw the line on certain things that don't involve the most vulnerable of our population, but I would also take a position that we actually should elevate these people who are more vulnerable.
Want to address that, Steve? Mr. Guerrero, you want to address that claim?
Again, Senator, I mean, if clarification is being made here, to say whether or not what was said and communicated to OFB is no longer true, then so be it. But I have my staff. I spoke to the gentleman myself, and he assured me that being the financial officer, and out of anybody in a department, the financial officer should know exactly the financial condition and the requirement of the agency. You can be the director, fine. If you're a good director and you're on top of things, kudos to you. But very few, I find, can do that. But you're talking about the people, the layman that does this stuff every day, that hearts, and this particular person that we're talking to, I can attest, he has a budget background. I work with him out of the Bureau budget, so I know his capability. I know his honesty. I know his work ethics. I'm not going to challenge him, but I'll tell you one thing right now. I will stick to what I told you on this floor, what I said on this floor, as being true. That's all I'm going to say.
Lester, did you transfer $20 million in ARP funds to Public Works for roads as mentioned by the director?
Yes, I did.
Those are for village streets, correct?
Those are for village streets.
So you're quibbling about the 10 million right now that was done a few fiscal years ago. We put 2 million, so we have 22 million right now available when this bill passes.
We're hoping that that 20 million has to be all expended by December of this year. So the 2 million will come into play after the 20 million is exhausted.
Steve, I want to go back now to this issue of the lapses, because I think that we're kind of getting lost in the weeds on that. I want to go back to whether available for appropriation or the issue of the agency, meaning that if we did a status quo budget for the agency in this fiscal year, or a status quo plus, that means if that agency is lapsing, they have that status quo budget going into the new fiscal year to try to expend those funds in that fiscal year, correct?
Yes, Senator.
So do you look at that as a cut to the agency?
Absolutely not. Because what it tells me, Senator, and if you're familiar with budgeting, is that when you budget for something, you budget for something in anticipation that you're going to spend this money over a period of time. If that does not materialize, at the end of the time, you're saying, oh, I got all this money. But lo and behold, you're budgeting again for the same period, the next, for example, in government, 12 months. What's happening here is that the departments are coming in asking for the same level of funding that they received the year before, generating all these lapses that they couldn't spend. Again, for whatever reason. And I don't think, and I would say part of the reason, the blame can be on the department. A lot of it is external. All the other forces, the programs, the systems, everything else that just convolutes everything, that just doesn't allow them to spend the money. But they're coming back the next fiscal year asking for the same level. And my only question to them is that if I gave you $100 today, and you can only spend $50 during that period, why are you asking me for $100 when I know you have $50 more to spend? If you don't take this into account, you're going to give them another $100 the next year. Now, all of a sudden, their appropriation level becomes $150, way beyond the means of them to spend it because they couldn't spend $50 the year before. Now, it could be one of those years that's tough. I understand that. Whatever the anomaly, yes. But when you see a pattern, year after year after year, you got to come and stop thinking like, hey, let's go back to the drawing board. Find out what's why. Why are these departments not spending? On a lot of them, their answer to me is this is external, Steve. Whether it be personnel, whether it be procurement, whether it be contractual problems, whether it be legal, AG not signing off on their contracts. But those are a host of all problems that we know exist in the government of Guam. It's not going to go away overnight. So I'm just saying, to answer your question, we do take into account when we set the ceilings. Because, I, for one, will not continue to appropriate knowing these departments don't have the ability or can't spend the funds.
Steve, on the 16 million for Simon Sanchez, 16 plus, I'm really perplexed here because we had this conversation. This anticipation of, you've always told me that appropriation should be going to market, meaning you're planning that they're going to close and you're going to have debt service. Were you ever under the understanding that we needed 2 advance payments, 2 fiscal year payments in order to be able to go and try to build Simon Sanchez?
Senator, no.
Thank you.
I was never afforded, nor was I ever told that would be a requirement in order to start the Simon Sanchez construction development, whatever. I was never told that. I don't see it in writing. I don't see it in the requests. I don't see it in the memo. I hear it. I'm hearing it, like I'm hearing it now.
You were the budget director in fiscal year 2024, correct?
Yes, sir.
That's when the act passed, correct?
Yes.
If that was the case, shouldn't you have appropriated 16.3 million in that year?
Absolutely. It would have been the first day of the start of this contract to get Simon Sanchez going.
And then if you appropriate in fiscal year 25, you have your 32 million and your 32 years, correct?
Yeah. But here we are today, 3 years later, and they're telling me, I'm hearing this again, that we need to come up with $32 million to start this. That was never brought up in any conversation in the 26th or in the 27th budget discussion. So I don't know what to say. I didn't appropriate 16.3 million in the 27th budget because, again, there's nothing concrete for me to set aside 16.3 million.
Director, it wasn't only brought up in the, not brought up in the 26 of the 27, it wasn't brought up in the 24 and the 25 after the law passed.
Senator, I don't know. I'll just go back to as far back as my memory will serve me correctly, at least the last 2 years. That much I can say. But you're right. The law was passed since 24-25. So,
So if this fiscal team coming down here telling this was known that since the law passed, they didn't request it in the EBR in fiscal year 2024, did they?
Not to my recollection.
They didn't request it in fiscal year 2025, correct?
I don't recall it in the 25 budget requests.
The procurement wasn't out yet.
You're saying you needed it.
No. Hang on a second. It was in the EBR. The procurement went out, I want to say November or December of 2025. So we didn't know what the need was until after we went through the interviews and the ranking and all that other kind of stuff. So we put it in the EBR. And I'm sorry if you're not aware that the legislation that this body passed calls for 32 years, because it does. I'm going to get it for you and disseminate it out because I'm getting the impression that, you aren't necessarily taking what I'm saying as being authorized.
Lester, we're going to go back to the tapes, and we listen openly to that negotiation. I listened to every single one of those procurement tapes, and consistently in those procurement tapes, there is this, you're going to have to go to the legislature for an additional 2 years. There was sounding to me like that whole negotiation didn't know that there were 32 years.
Okay, you are saying that I said you're going to have to go back down there. He's saying, no, it's there. And you know what? We're getting into procurement again, sir. But
this is in the ether. This is wild. We are not violating anything. This is part of a discussion and
Okay.
that you were having
What I
with the
said-
team there in negotiations.
What I said was, please listen to this.
will.
If you want, because I was pushing back on that. That's why he said, if I need to, and he made some jokes about upping the political contributions to the body, okay? And it was a joke.
Probably to the front office too.
Maybe, but regardless, sir, I was pushing back on the request for the 32 years. I said, no, it's got to be 30. And then he kept pointing to that, you know what? It's authorized. And his bid was predicated on it. Now, if you're listening to the tapes, you should have known that I was pushing back hard because I didn't think that
That's
was
why
fair.
I'm trying to understand why you're pushing for these appropriations.
Because
to me, this shouldn't be done until that thing's ready to go to market.
You know, the body authorized
Because you're
it, he's
arguing
taking
it as
advantage
part of
it.
the reason why this BPT reduction is a sin, but I'm telling you, I'm going to be really watching closely on this floor when they try to raise that BPT if this is one of their reasons, because many on this floor openly have had big problems with the discussion on appropriating 2 years additional appropriation. So get us the information so we know, because I'm telling you, that is a big point of contention in this body.
Okay. I wish that that conversation was not tied to or within the context of the BPT. And I get it that that's the Republicans, that's their big thing or whatever, but I don't care about that, at least not compared to this issue, okay? Because I'll tell you this BPT reduction from 4.5 to 4% is nothing numerically compared to contracting the taxpayers for the next 32 years more than $500 million. Numerically, there's no competition. What's more important numerically in terms of taxpayer money is this issue of the procurement and what the legislature has authorized. I want to go back to why in the hell did the legislature in 2023 authorize an annual payment of up to $16.377 million? What were we thinking? Because anyone who multiplies 16.377 million times 30 on a calculator is going to get something like $489 million. Why wasn't our cap for this thing a $10 million debt service payment or annual lease back payment over 30 years, which brings us to about $300 million, or a principal of $100 million in construction and development costs for Simon Sanchez High School. Still brings us the most expensive school that we've ever built, but maybe that speaks to the increased cost of construction. And what sort of confidence do I have that that's something that's reasonable? GPS, according to their protests, they bid to build the new Simon Sanchez High School for $80 million. So the debt service would have probably been below $10 million. So let's start with, why did the legislature even authorize that much money? And then you go to, why did the legislature have 3 different caps that don't make any sense whatsoever? What exactly did each of these senators know as they were voting for this thing? And then we get to the administration. Why the heck didn't anyone in the administration fight back about the cost, aside from Lester Carlson fighting about the 2 years, the 2 additional years? But at least for the 30-year period, why did nobody say, hey, Cortec, wait a minute. You're going to take the entire 16.377. You're going to go to the cap. That's where we're at with this thing. And on top of that, you're suggesting that we take some things off of the table for the design of Simon Sanchez High School, that we take away from the kids and the teachers and the people of GIGO. How come no one on the negotiating team was standing up for the people of Guam? These are the things that I'd like to know about. Like, I don't care about this in the context of the BPT. I don't care about those politics. And numerically, this Simon Sanchez High School thing, costs us more than this BPT will. Far more. And so, yeah, I don't care about the context of it. But I do want these senators to push back on this whole $16.377 million cap for 30, and the audacity of it all, 32 years. And it would be nice to know what exactly our esteemed senators knew from 2023 forward, especially considering that the author of this act, Roy Kandit, is running for senator again. He lost in the last election, but he's running to come back in this election. And you know how it goes with name recognition. If you have great name recognition, especially in a gubernatorial year where more people are paying attention to the gubernatorial politics than senatorial, name recognition tends to slide in. I think we need to be asking some pretty tough questions of Senator Roy Kandit, like, where did your bill come from? Why did your bill say these things that don't make any sense? And what possessed you to make this a $500 million endeavor for the taxpayers to undertake over a 30-year period? For Kandit News, I'm Troy Torres. I want to thank you all for joining me tonight, and join us tomorrow morning. I'm not sure what time. These shows, the morning show is supposed to be at 8 a.m. because of the power and the data issues. We're going to be a little more loose with that until I get power back at my place. And the evening shows are supposed to be at 7:30 p.m. We started tonight at 7:31 p.m. But anyway, our schedule is not going to be something that we're going to follow with fidelity until the power goes back on, or until I figure out something with this generator that doesn't work well. Anyway, for Kandit News, I'm Troy Torres. Good night, and God bless you all.
He has that innate talent of even the most difficult times, giving comfort, giving solace, bringing stability. In my 64 years, there are people I've known that have passed away, and there's been Tony that has been there to comfort the family and the loved ones, sometimes the most difficult times of their lives. He could better this community as a public servant, but bring people together, even people with divergent thoughts and philosophies, but in the end, bringing enough comfort, enough stability to a situation that there's a consensus and then resolution and progress that is made. So, I'm so excited. I've seen what a great job Tony's done now back in the legislature. But I do believe that with him as governor, that ability to bring people together, to bring folks even with different perspectives together, it's what this island needs. God bless Atacalvo 2026. God bless Guam.
I'm Tony Atta, and I approve this message.
Transportation, tourism, customs, utilities, and federal and foreign affairs touch every family, every business, every day. Jesse Michael Anderson Lujan believes Guam can be greater together by fighting for cabotage exemption, expanding the Philippine visa waiver program, and opening new doors for tourism investment and opportunity. Vote Jesse Lujan. Leadership you can see. Accountability you can trust.
I'm Jesse Michael Anderson Lujan, and I approve this message.